Kepler 442 station orbited a gas giant so massive that 3 smaller planets could comfortably fit inside its storm systems, and yet somehow the most impressive thing about this corner of space wasn't the celestial mechanics. It was the university, the galactic Xenobi.
According to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content.
Biology Institute stood as a testament to what happened when 17 different species decided that higher education needed to be, well, higher, literally. The thing floated. The amphitheater on level 63 could seat 400 students from roughly 80 different species, provided nobody minded that the methane breathers sat in their own pressurized section and the silicon-based life forms got the heated corner. Architecture became remarkably creative when gravity was optional, and everyone's idea of comfortable atmospheric pressure ranged from light vacuum to soup you could swim through. Professor Thexmalon belonged to a species that looked like someone had asked a committee to design an octopus, then given them a budget that only covered 6 tentacles and a budget surplus that went entirely into making the skin shimmer in colors that didn't technically exist in normal space. He bobbed near the holographic display at the center of the room, 2 tentacles gesturing, while the others handled his data pad, his lunch, and what appeared to be stress relief putty. Advanced Extinct Apex Predators 301 was not a class for the faint of heart, or hearts, or whatever organ handled fear in your particular biology. The hologram flickered, displaying a creature that looked like evolution had gotten drunk and decided to combine a lizard with a tiger, then added spikes because subtlety was for cowards. The students in the front row leaned back. The ones in the middle row took notes. The one human in the back row, wedged between a crystalline helixian and something that resembled a mobile fern, squinted at her data pad. The Raxian Gut Ripper, Professor Thexmalon announced, his voice carrying that peculiar tone professors everywhere mastered, the one that said he'd given this lecture 40 times and would give it 40 more before retirement. Extinct for approximately 3,000 standard years, native to Raxus Prime before the unfortunate incident with the asteroid. Apex predator, 400 kilograms of muscle, claws that could shred titanium alloy, bite force that measured. He paused for effect, 12,000 pounds per square inch. A collective murmur rippled through the amphitheater. Datapad styluses scratched. The helixian next to the human vibrated slightly, which was apparently how her species said, "Yikes." Formidable, yes? The professor cycled through several more images, each displaying the gut ripper in various poses of looking absolutely ready to ruin someone's day. And yet observe the environmental scans from Raxus Prime. Gravity, 0.8 standard. Atmospheric pressure, 0.7 standard. Average temperature, 22 degrees Celsius. What does this tell us? A student near the front, some manner of insectoid with too many eyes and not enough sense of personal space, raised a foreclaw. That the gut ripper evolved in relatively mild conditions. Precisely. Professor Thexmalon's skin flashed approval purple. Which leads us to today's primary lesson. The deadliest predators in galactic history did not come from death worlds. They came from garden worlds, comfortable worlds, worlds where evolution had the luxury of crafting perfect killing machines without the constraints of survival overwhelming predation. The human in the back row stopped squinting and started frowning. Professor Thexmalon was warming to his subject now, which involved his skin cycling through colors like a disco ball, having an identity crisis. Consider the Vrelnax bone crusher, extinct. Gravity 0.9 standard. or the thermal ripper of Caldonis 7, extinct, gravity 0.75 standard. There is a pattern here, students. The universe's most terrifying creatures emerged from worlds we would consider, frankly, pleasant vacation destinations. Another hologram appeared, this one showing a quadruped that looked like someone had combined a rhinoceros with a meat grinder and added far too many teeth. The feral juggernaut of Theta Noctis, extinct for 500 years, could run at speeds exceeding 80 kilometers per hour, could gore prey from 50 meters using its projectile tusks. Projectile tusks. He let that sink in, and it evolved on a world with 0.85 gravity and a temperate climate that the tourism board would have called refreshing. The human raised her hand. Professor Thexmalon didn't notice. He was too busy cycling to the next image, this one displaying what appeared to be an entire food chain of nightmares. Now, we come to the mystery species, the subject of your final examination. I will describe their world, and you will hypothesize about the predators that must have evolved there. Several students perked up. Finals weren't for another 6 weeks, but academic anxiety recognized no temporal boundaries. 1 standard gravity. The professor began, counting off on his tentacles. 70% water coverage, atmospheric pressure, 1 standard, temperature range from -40 to +50 Celsius, depending on latitude and season, tectonically active, frequent seismic events, volcanic activity, extreme weather patterns including cyclonic storms that could level cities. The human's hand went higher. Atmospheric composition, nitrogen and oxygen, with the oxygen comprising 21%. Oxygen, students, one of the most corrosive gases in the known galaxy. The planet essentially breathes fire hazard. A few students glanced at their atmospheric filters nervously. This world, Professor Thexmalon continued, absolutely on a roll now, harbored predators that hunted in coordinated packs, predators that could run for days without rest, predators that evolved to throw projectiles with lethal accuracy, predators that crafted tools, predators that mastered fire, predators that developed rudimentary agriculture while simultaneously perfecting warfare. The human's hand was now fully extended, accompanied by a small cough that suggested patience was becoming a finite resource. And the apex predators of this death world, the professor said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was an ominous whisper, but really just sounded like he needed water, went extinct approximately 200 standard years ago. The planet was catalogued as a sterilized wasteland. The predators presumably eliminated each other in their violence. A cautionary tale about evolution creating something too deadly even for its own survival. The human stood up. The motion created a ripple effect. The Helixian's crystalline structure chimed in alarm. The mobile fern rustled. Half the amphitheater turned to look at the human, because standing up during a lecture was either incredibly rude or incredibly important, and the smart money was usually on rude. "Excuse me, Professor," the human said, her voice carrying that particular tone that suggested what was about to happen would be memorable for all the wrong reasons. "I think there's been a mistake." Professor Thexmalon's skin went confused, beige. A mistake? In my lecture? He cycled through his datapad with 2 tentacles, while the others expressed various stages of academic offense. "I assure you, these records are from the Galactic Archives themselves, peer-reviewed, triple-checked. The source material is impeccable." "I'm sure it is," the human said, and there was something in her expression that suggested she was trying very hard not to laugh, which was never a good sign. "But that planet you're describing, The one with the terrifying apex predators that went extinct. Yes? It's called Earth, sir. The amphitheater went very, very quiet. And I'm from there. The human continued, still standing, still with that expression. We didn't go extinct. I literally had breakfast there 3 weeks ago before catching the shuttle. Professor Thexmalon's skin went through approximately 14 colors that didn't have names in any language, including several that might have violated physics. His stress relief putty dropped to the floor with a sound that seemed unreasonably loud in the sudden silence. "That's," he said, then stopped, started again. "You're saying, Earth's fine, bit crowded in some places. Weather's been weird lately, but when isn't it? The apex predators are still around." The human paused. "We're the apex predators, sir. Humans. We're what you've been describing." Somewhere in the back of the amphitheater, a student fainted. It was unclear which species, but the thud was universal. The silence stretched like taffy in a zero-gravity experiment, which was to say it went in directions silence shouldn't normally go and made everyone uncomfortable. Professor Thexmalon's tentacles performed a series of movements that his species typically reserved for moments of profound existential confusion. "You're from..." But the records clearly state, the probe data indicated. "Let me see those records," the human said, making her way down the amphitheater steps. Students parted, like she was carrying something contagious, which from their perspective, she probably was. She was from a death world that apparently still had death on it. The professor pulled up the file with trembling appendages. The human leaned in, scrolling through the data with the kind of casual familiarity that suggested reading about your home planet being declared a wasteland was just another Tuesday. "Oh," she said after a moment. "Oh, this is hilarious." Nothing about the professor's current expression suggested he found anything hilarious. "Look at the date," the human continued, pointing at the screen. 207 years ago, and look at the landing coordinates. She zoomed in on a planetary map that showed a probe landing site in what the file labeled as Hostile Territory Designation Extreme. "Canada," she read aloud. "They landed in northern Canada during winter." She started laughing, the kind of laugh that made several students edge toward the exits. "And they marked the whole planet as sterilized because a probe landed in a snowstorm and encountered wildlife." Professor Thexmalon's skin flickered through confusion beige and heading toward panic chartreuse. Surely if the planet was habitable, there would have been follow-up missions, verification surveys. The protocols require... "Let me guess," the human interrupted, pulling out her personal data pad. "The probe's last transmission was something about massive predators and extreme temperatures and structural damage." The professor checked. His skin went pale blue, which in his species indicated he really wished he was somewhere else. "The final log entry mentions enormous fur-covered predators, atmospheric ice precipitation, and complete systems failure due to temperature exposure and bite damage." "They met a bear," the human said, still grinning. "Probably a polar bear, given the location. Maybe a pack of wolves. During a blizzard." She tapped her data pad. "Here, let me show you what Earth actually looks like." The holographic display flickered as she synced her device. Images bloomed in the air above them. Blue oceans, green continents, swirling white clouds, cities that glittered like circuit boards. It looked, several students thought with growing horror, lovely. 7 billion humans, the human narrated, swiping through images, plus approximately 20 billion chickens, 1 billion cattle, 500 million cats and dogs as pets, and wildlife numbers that fluctuate but remain robust despite our best efforts to pave over everything. She pulled up an image of a common house cat. Someone in the third row whimpered. "This is a cat," the human explained. "We keep them in our homes, for fun. They're obligate carnivores with retractable claws, night vision, and reflexes fast enough to snatch flying prey out of the air. We bred them down from wild predators, and now we let them sleep on our beds." Professor Thexmalon stared at the image of the cat, which had apparently been photographed mid-yawn, displaying impressive dentition. "You share sleeping quarters with predators?" "We share sleeping quarters with each other," the human pointed out. "We're the predators, remember? Here, look at this." She swiped to a video of a human child, perhaps 6 years old, running through what appeared to be a park. Chasing her was a dog, some manner of canine that was all teeth and enthusiasm. "That's a German shepherd," the human said, "descended from wolves. We domesticated them about 15,000 years ago, and now we let them play with our offspring. The dog weighs about 40 kilograms. The child weighs maybe 20. We consider this safe." The Helixian next to the human's empty seat made a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "But surely," Professor Thexmalon said, his voice climbing toward frequencies usually reserved for equipment malfunction alarms, "surely your civilization has protocols, safety measures. You don't just coexist with these creatures in uncontrolled environments." The human pulled up another image. This one showed a person standing in what appeared to be a forest, surrounded by trees that stretched up into fog. "This is called hiking," she said. "We do it for recreation. We walk into wilderness areas filled with predators and potentially dangerous wildlife, and we do it to relax." "What?" The professor's skin was now cycling through colors that weren't in any textbook. "What manner of predators?" "Depends on the continent. Bears, wolves, big cats, venomous snakes, spiders, crocodiles, sharks if you're near water, hippopotamuses if you're in Africa." "Hippopotamuses." "Herbivores, technically, but they kill more humans per year than most predators. Territorial. 3,000 pounds of angry. We still build tourist facilities near them." A student in the front row stood up and quietly excused himself. Then another. Then a cluster of them, all suddenly remembering they had important appointments literally anywhere else. Professor Zelthor spent 3 sleepless cycles combing through the galactic archives, which was impressive considering his species only needed sleep once per lunar rotation. The classification error had to be somewhere in the records. Finally, he found it. Survey report XJ7749, dated 200 standard years prior. The file was marked with red priority flags and annotated with warnings that made his scales stand on end. "Found something?" Marcus asked, leaning over his shoulder with a cup of what he called coffee, a bitter, stimulant beverage that Professor Zelthor had watched him consume 6 times that day alone. "The original survey probe," the professor said, pulling up grainy footage. "It was deployed during what we now understand was one of your planet's ice ages. Oh yeah, we get those every 100,000 years or so. Keeps things interesting." The professor's antenna wilted. "Keeps things..." He shook his head and pressed play. The probe's descent looked normal enough. Standard atmospheric entry, parachute deployment over a snow-covered landscape. Then the footage became decidedly abnormal. The probe had landed in what the records identified as Siberia during winter. The temperature reading made Professor Zelthor's environmental suit automatically increase its heating. -40 degrees. The landscape was nothing but white desolation and dark forests. "Day 1, the probe's AI narrated cheerfully, "commencing xenobiology survey." It took exactly 47 minutes for things to go wrong. a massive furry creature. The database later identified it as Ursus arctos, a brown bear, had approached the probe with apparent curiosity. The probe, following standard protocols, attempted communication through gentle lights and sounds. The bear, unimpressed by first contact procedures, had swatted the probe 15 meters across the snow. "Oh no," Marcus said, trying not to laugh. It got worse. The probe, damaged but functional, had begun its emergency transmission when a pack of Canis lupus, wolves, arrived to investigate. The footage showed them circling, teeth bared, before one lunged forward and clamped its jaws around the probe's primary sensor array. "By the 7 moons," Professor Zelthor whispered. The probe's AI, now thoroughly panicked, had activated all its alarms simultaneously. This attracted more wildlife. The audio became a cacophony of howls, roars, and what the translation matrix could only interpret as aggressive territorial vocalizations. The probe's final transmission, before a particularly determined bear crushed it beneath one massive paw, was indeed screaming. The AI's last words were, "Planet hostile, dominated by apex predators, extreme environmental conditions, unsurvivable, do not approach, do not." Static. The Galactic Council had reviewed this transmission and immediately classified Earth as a death world, Class Omega. Survey teams were redirected. The planet was marked with every warning flag in the database. "So that's why everyone thinks we're extinct," Marcus said. "Your probe landed in Siberia, in winter, and got mauled by bears. That is an accurate summary." Professor Zelthor looked up at his human colleague. "The report describes this as extreme environmental conditions. You called it mild weather, yeah." Marcus shrugged. "I mean, -40 is chilly, but people live in Siberia. Lots of people. They have cities, farms, schools. My buddy Dmitri grew up there. Says the bears mostly keep to themselves if you don't bother them." "Mostly?" Professor Zelthor's voice pitched higher. "Mostly? Well, yeah. Sometimes they wander into towns looking for food. You just chase them off with sticks or firecrackers." The professor stared at his data pad, then at Marcus, then back at the footage of the destroyed probe. His antennae began trembling. "You chase the territorial apex predators," he said slowly, "with sticks. Sometimes brooms, whatever's handy." Professor Zelthor felt the first hairline crack in his understanding of the universe. Humans didn't just survive on Earth. They thrived there. They called it home, and they thought -40 degrees was chilly. Word of the probe incident spread through the xenobiology department faster than a plasma fire. By the next lecture, Professor Zelthor's classroom was packed beyond capacity. Students from astrophysics, exolinguistics, even the culinary arts program had crowded in, all wanting to hear more about the extinct species that casually lived among apex predators. Marcus arrived to find himself the center of attention, which he found deeply confusing. "Mr. Chen," Professor Zelthor began, his voice only slightly trembling, "perhaps you could describe a typical day on Earth for the class." Sure." Marcus set down his bag. Several students flinched at the movement. "I mean, nothing exciting. Wake up around 7, make breakfast." "What do you eat?" interrupted Kelvin, a gelatinous Balorx who absorbed nutrients through osmosis. "Eggs, usually. Sometimes bacon." "What?" Professor Zelthor said carefully. "Is bacon?" "Preserved meat from pigs. We cure it with salt and smoke it." The classroom fell silent. "You preserve flesh," whispered Shara, a crystalline lithid with a mineral and combustion byproducts. "Yeah, makes it last longer. Tastes great, too." Marcus smiled, oblivious to the horror spreading through the room. "Anyway, then I'd bike to work." "Bike?" Self-powered transportation. 2 wheels, you pedal with your legs. Good exercise. Professor Zelthor made a note. You choose to expend energy on locomotion rather than using it for survival needs. I mean, it is for survival. Gotta stay in shape. After work, I'd hit the gym for an hour. Gym? Place where we deliberately stress our bodies to make them stronger. Lift heavy objects repeatedly. Run on machines that go nowhere. That kind of thing. A Flixian student raised their appendage. You damage your muscle tissue. On purpose? Well, yeah. That's how it grows back stronger. Basic biology. Marcus noticed everyone staring at him. What? Mr. Chen, Professor Zelthor said slowly. Most species avoid physical damage. Our bodies don't improve from trauma. Oh, huh. Marcus processed this. So when you get hurt, you just stay hurt? We heal to baseline function, yes. Weird. Anyway, after the gym, I'd usually go for a run. After the physical stress activity, you perform additional cardiovascular strain. Professor Zelthor's antennae were now in full distress curl. Sure. Maybe 5 or 6 kilometers. Kilometers? Then home for dinner. Sometimes I'd cook, maybe order pizza. What is pizza? Asked a brave Xinthian in the back. Marcus's face lit up. Oh man, pizza's great. It's bread dough. We cultivate special fungus to make it rise, topped with tomato sauce, cheese, whatever else you want. Throw it in a super hot oven. How hot? Professor Zelthor asked with morbid fascination. Like 450 degrees Fahrenheit? Around 230 Celsius? Several students checked their translators, assuming an error. Those temperatures could denature proteins, break down cellular structures. And you eat this? Kelvin gurgled in disbelief. Well, yeah, after it cools down a bit. You can't eat it right out of the oven. That'd burn your mouth. The phrase, burn your mouth, hung in the air like a death sentence. Let me understand, Professor Zelthor said, his voice barely steady. You consume food hot enough to damage your tissue, and your only concern is waiting for it to become less damaging. I mean, when you put it that way, it sounds bad. Marcus scratched his head. Sometimes I'm impatient and eat it too early. Get those little burns on the roof of your mouth, you know. Annoying for a day or two. A day or two, the professor repeated. Your mouth tissue regenerates in days. Couple days, yeah. Why? Professor Zelthor pulled up his datapad with shaking appendages and began displaying images. Mr. Chen, these are Earth's dominant predators, yes? We found them in the archives. Marcus looked at the parade of creatures. Great white sharks, saltwater crocodiles, polar bears, Bengal tigers, lions, leopards, wolves, hippos, elephants, Cape buffalo. Yeah, that's some of them. Pretty cool animals. These are your planet's apex predators, the professor said. The species at the top of the food chain, the ones with no natural predators of their own. Right, yeah. Mr. Chen. Professor Zelthor's voice was very quiet. Where do humans fall on this hierarchy? Marcus blinked. Oh, I mean, we're the apex predator, obviously. The classroom erupted. What? Impossible. You have no natural defenses, no claws, no venom, no armor plating. Marcus waited for the chaos to die down. We don't need those things. We have endurance, intelligence, and opposable thumbs. We can outlast anything in a long chase, persistence hunting. We can throw projectiles with insane accuracy. We can coordinate in groups, and we're adaptable as hell. He shrugged. We live everywhere on Earth, every environment. Frozen tundra, scorching deserts, thick jungles, high mountains. We even put people in space, underwater, in places specifically designed to kill us, just to see if we could. By the ancients. whispered Shara. You colonize uninhabitable zones for recreation. Some people climb mountains for fun. Marcus agreed. Oh, and speaking of mountains, we live on all 7 continents, including Antarctica, which averages like -50 Celsius. Professor Zelthor wasn't listening anymore. He was recalculating everything he thought he knew about survival, adaptation, and the fundamental nature of life itself. Humans weren't just survivors of a death world. They were the reason it was a death world. Everything else on Earth had to adapt to survive them. He pulled up Earth's evolutionary record, hands trembling as he traced humanity's origins. You didn't even start as apex predators, he said, voice hollow with realization. You were prey animals, mid-tier omnivores at best. Yeah, for a while, Marcus confirmed. Then we developed better tools, language, cooperation. Took us a few 100,000 years, but we figured it out. You evolved into apex predators through sheer determination and problem-solving. Professor Zelthor felt faint. You didn't have the decency to be born dangerous. You chose it. I never thought about it that way, but yeah, I guess so. A Kixian student spoke up, voice quavering. Professor, if humans are this formidable, why are they here? What do they want from the galaxy? Everyone turned to Marcus, who looked genuinely puzzled by the question. To learn, make friends, share cool stuff about our cultures. He smiled warmly. I've always wanted to see other worlds, meet other species. Earth's great, but there's a whole universe out there, you know. The innocent enthusiasm in his voice somehow made it worse. The apex predator of a death world just wanted to make friends. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Council issued an update to Earth's classification. The planet was no longer marked as extinct civilization, but rather active death world, Class Omega, do not approach, inhabited by apex species of extreme concern. The update included a footnote about a human exchange program accepting applications for 5 more positions. Professor Zelthor read the posting in disbelief. They're sending more? Marcus, overhearing, grinned. Yeah, my friend Sarah got accepted. She's excited to study here. She's from Australia. What's Australia? Oh, it's this continent where literally everything is trying to kill you. Spiders the size of your face, jellyfish that stop your heart, snakes, crocodiles. Even the plants are venomous. Sarah grew up catching snakes in her backyard for fun. Professor Zelthor quietly began updating his will. The humans were multiplying.